It's Thursday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
Prime Minister arrived here a couple of hours ago and straight into this argument about reparations.
Keir Starmer doesn't want to talk about it, but other Commonwealth countries do. Should the UK pay reparations for slavery? Disposable vapes will be banned in England and Wales next summer. Are we going to have to learn to love the nanny state?
We need people to start working from home where they possibly can.
It was 4.5 years ago. Is it time civil servants got back to the office?
For too many fans, they've had to live with the daily anxiety that a football club that is part of their inheritance, where they went with their granddad and their dad and they take their kids, is on the verge of collapse.
But should the government be getting involved in regulating football? Joining us today, Labour MP Stella Creasy, Conservative MP George Freeman, Parth Patel from the centre-left think tank the Institute for Public Policy Research, a non-affiliated peer and director of the Academy of Ideas, Claire Fox. This is Politics Live. Let's start with the final story you heard there in the headlines. Here is BBC News. Government to introduce strengthened football governance bill. Should the state be getting involved in regulating football? Stella?
Yes, I'm obviously sat here banging the drum for grassroots football because I'm sure you know that this is the Walthamstow FC football kit. We are a mere 7 leagues away from being Premiership glory. It's going to happen for us, but fundamentally the entire ecosystem of football in this country is at stake, and we've seen clubs like Bury in trouble. We've seen all sorts of shenanigans, frankly, in the Premier League. And the challenge with this is that it only works if everybody works together. What's happened over the last decade or so is that that's shown that that is at risk, and the risk to all of us, especially those of us who are big fans of grassroots football, is that the whole thing could go under. So it's absolutely right that we get involved. The question is, how do you get the regulation right? And I hear the concerns from the Premier League about how you do it well, and that's what the bill and the consultation on the bill and how it will work together is about. But fundamentally, because I want to see Walthamstow FC get funding so that it can take on and be the new underdogs, move over Wrexham, we need this legislation to happen.
I hear you from Walthamstow. Over on the other side, Claire, should the state be getting involved in regulating football on the basis of what you've just heard?
No. Or let's put it this way, I think the danger of mission creep, the danger of politicising football is very strong in this. I thought that it was interesting because the Premier League is a huge success, and so let's interfere in it. And we've just had the investment summit in which the Prime Minister rightly pointed out that over-regulation and red tape can be a real problem. So when you hear then people in football saying, we're going to be interfered in by the state into the governance of football teams, I think there's a real problem. And I mean, I'm all for fan power. I'm just not convinced that a top-down regulator is a necessary requirement for fans to have more power. And in fact, they managed to get rid of the European Super League without any help from the government. Thank you very much. I also think that there are dangers here because they've introduced new clauses that weren't there before in relation to insisting that equality, diversity and inclusion be now, you know, very much
a clear commitment to
governance.
It.
Yeah, well, if you talk to anyone who works in the public sector, universities, the whole nightmare around EDI being used as a way of policing behaviour, chilling free speech, all sorts of difficulties.
All right.
And people should just check out, by the way, Lindsay Smith, who's a Newcastle United lifelong football fan, was banned by her own club because the EDI director saw something that she tweeted about biological women and sport and all of those kind of things, and she's been banned. And I'm just making the point that EDI is not the friend of the fans.
Well, do you want to pick up, first of all, on the commitment to EDI, which is diversity, broadly speaking? Do you think that's a good thing, to have a commitment within a regulated
absolutely,
body?
Absolutely it is, yeah. Why on earth should the players have great diversity on the pitch but not the owners? It doesn't make any sense. I actually completely disagree with Claire's opinion because I think what it misses is that what football has changed. It's changed a great deal. Clubs have become assets in a portfolio of investments for mega firms. They've also become a place for or stage for global politics to be playing out, right? What that's doing, what that has done, in fact, is it's dragged clubs away, further and further away from the communities that sustain them, from the families they're part of, from the towns and the cities they're their identity of. And the only way to stand up to that, Claire, is government action. That's why we need...
Stella mentioned Wrexham. I'd just like to point out, I'm from North Wales. Wrexham did not need the government. They might have needed Hollywood stars, but I'm just pointing out the idea that the government are going to do this on behalf of the working classes is a joke.
Well, the regulator is independent of the government, right? And that's worth remembering. And it's not whether we need a regulator or not.
All right, well,
it's about the strength of the regulator.
Well, but Parth
right?
has a point. It's a way of life, isn't it, football, in terms of being part of communities. We just heard a passionate defence and celebration of Walthamstow.
Yes.
And does that mean it's more broad than just the game of football?
Yes, and my answer to your question is yes. Look, but not political regulation. It needs economic regulation. It's a major industry, it's a major export, it's a major asset. And as we've talked about, huge investment. So I pay tribute to Tracy Crouch, my former colleague, and I'm really pleased that we've started this. But what it doesn't need is political regulation. And I share some of Claire's fears that economic regulation would become sort of, mass wokery, everyone taking the knee. Football does not need that, but it does need economic regulation so that grassroots clubs, I have Dereham Football Club is a marvellous club. They are even 2 leagues below Walthamstow.
Gosh, are there that many leagues?
Yeah, grassroots football really does need a better deal.
We're working our way through all of them in Walthamstow.
Yeah, well done.
So I think in terms of the markets need regulation, good regulation, and in terms of grassroots football, it needs some regulation, but we don't need political interference.
What do you think about that mission creep, I think was the term that Clay...
I'm sorry, but the idea that trans women or Black Lives Matter is anything to do with one of the fundamental challenges that we're facing here. I could also have been sat here wearing a green and gold scarf. I grew up in Manchester. I supported Man United. It breaks my heart to see what the Glazers have done to that club, where they've turned that club into an asset, where they've sweated out all the value. And for fans, it is about the fans, Claire. That is the challenge here. Yeah. Football has become a global industry. The only reason that the European Super League was stopped was not fan power. It was the threat that actually governments were going to have to get involved to protect the fans' interests. That's what this is about. It is about protecting fans.
Just hold on. Every fan, I'm surrounded by an office full of obsessive football fans. I've got a family of obsessive football fans. They detest the football governance bill. So before everybody decides to be speaking on behalf of all the fans...
Do they? They all detest it?
They all think it's like, why do we need this? It's going to be overly bureaucratic. Yeah, well, that's at least mixed. I just think the people I know are not very keen on it. And I think that the point that I'm making and the point about mission creep and the politicisation point is, I didn't say this before because this has been newly introduced by the government in the bill, the EDI thing. I didn't bring it up, right? I'm not trying to make this a culture wars issue. I'm saying I suddenly read it and thought, what's that doing there? So if you don't want to politicise this issue, take the politics out of it, not inject it into the new legislation.
Right. Well, let's finally.
I was just say that football in this country is run like cowboys. Sure, we escaped the European Super League, right? But we have clubs riddled with debt whose entire model... I don't have any sympathy with the Toffees in general, right? But the way in which the fans who support Everton Football Club have to worry about the nightmare of administration every
so we're
day
in profound agreement, economic regulation. But I think the point Claire's making is the bill starts to go a bit further, which is political regulation, EDI, the culture of football clubs.
Let me defend that.
Someone's going to have the final word. Maybe Stella.
Economic regulation. It is a right question to ask when there is such diversity on the pitch. Why there is so little diversity behind in the backrooms, not just in the ownership, but in the management of the clubs, and what talent we are missing out on if we want the game to be sustainable. This is about making sure football is sustainable at every level in this country. So it's not just the fans of the Toffees, it's the fans in Bury and all the pressure they went through. Time and time again, we are having to intervene to save football clubs and their heritage because this has now become an international global brand in which there is pressure on those clubs. Part of asking those questions about how you make football sustainable is also asking, why aren't you using the talent that is patently there but is being locked out for some reason? That's what EDI is.
And some of that talent is in the fan base.
All right, well, let's talk about some of the measures that will be taken to protect our health, as the government has said. Let's take a look at this headline in the Daily Mail. Single-use vapes will be banned in the UK by next summer amid crackdown on children smoking e-cigarettes. Wales has introduced similar bans, and governments in Scotland and Northern Ireland are expected to do the same. Will you be fully behind this, Parth?
I will, yeah. Single-use vapes are kind of a no-brainer to ban. And there's a health dimension to that, but there's also an environmental dimension to that, right? You buy these things, you smoke them, and you chuck them away, and they're everywhere. And there's a sort of epidemic of single-use vaping that, to be honest, most people I think agree would be better off without them, right? What I find slightly, what we need to not conflate here is with the thing that's just coming up on the screen now, the tax fee.
Well, not yet.
Okay.
We'll hold that, but you stick on the single-use vapes.
Yeah, so the word nanny state, I guess, is the thing I have an issue with, because we group a range of things under this rubric of the nanny state. They're different policies. Some is tax, some is regulation, some is education, some is advertising. They work in different ways. Corporate behaviour, consumer behaviour, norms, and therefore we need to judge them differently, right? We are the sickest country in Europe. That is full stop true. We also have the greatest health inequalities in Europe. Full stop true. Some of the most effective policies we have to address this is tax and regulation, and that's why we need to take them more seriously.
Claire?
So I've gone from being a 40-a-day smoker, and you might think, I've listened to the public health authorities who, warned of the dangers of smoking. And I am absolutely furious and worried about this attack on single-use vaping. I mean, that's what I do, right? I use those. And I think it's a miracle.
So you've transitioned off cigarettes, you've given up smoking,
exactly.
and you're now using vape.
Congratulated by doctors alike and all the rest of it, right? Medics who say to me, that's brilliant, good for your health. And suddenly there's a war on vapes, disposable vapes. And so one of the things that really worries me, I mean, I'm not even doing the nanny state stuff here, is that the public health zealotry seems relentless, right? So how can you be in a situation where you actually encourage people to and tell them that smoking is bad for them? I think it should be a free activity. But nonetheless, then the single biggest solution that's really changed lots of people's lives, that means that they don't smoke, is now the subject of, we're going to ban them from next summer.
I support vapes.
I mean, I actually was thinking, what am I going to do? I'll be like, black
vapes won't be
myself.
banned. Single-use disposable.
Can I
And
just-
children, I think, are at the sort of forefront of this.
Hold on. If it was only children,
Yeah.
then that would be different.
Well.
They've moved from it being children to adults. And by the way, disposable vapes are what some and many people choose to use, not the silly ones that take ages to fire up and everything.
Stella, do you
Leave
want-
us alone, for God's sake.
Leave her alone, Stella.
Leave her alone.
Well, and actually, I know Claire might not believe this, I am on the libertarian wing of the Labour movement. I do believe that we need to make sure people have the right information so they can make the best choices for them. I think there's two things here, Claire. Actually, the information that we now have about vaping is it's not as health risk averse as we might have first
That's not
thought.
That's
Can I
really,
finish?
I've looked at all
Claire,
that.
I've
Let her
listened to you.
finish. Yeah, let her finish.
There is a
and
more
then come back.
pragmatic thing here, because I was going to ask you, like, absolutely, vapes aren't being banned. You don't want to use a reusable vape. I mean, the reason I ask about that is because on the whole, it actually works out cheaper. Now, you want to make choices with your own money. You want to spend more, you want to create more mess. You don't want to have the hassle of having to have a reusable vape. But you are asking all the rest of us to deal with the consequence of that. And all I ask you to think about is that those disposable ones are marketed at kids. A quarter of kids under the age of 15 are now using a vape. They aren't in the same position as you, as an adult, to be able to make those kind of choices. They are being targeted by these marketers. Anybody who says otherwise doesn't recognise the way in which these things are
before I
promoted.
go back to get
Isn't
George,
it right
what
that
do you-
actually we intervene at
All
that
right,
point
yeah,
to
you've made
protect
your-
them and then help you figure out how best to use your money on a reusable vape?
Where are you as a Conservative?
Former
George?
health minister and
former
worked
health-
in health. Yeah, so I agree with, I will support the ban on disposable vapes. I agree with Claire that vaping is actually, for many people, a step in the right direction. But like many places, my constituency in my main three towns, it's littered with disposable, thrown away disposable
Yeah, it's
vapes and
interesting
vape shops.
that's become such a sort of an element of this whole discussion, is that you just see them everywhere.
Yeah, and also, this is where children are getting into. These shops are also selling, many of them below the counter, cannabis. There's a whole street OTC ecosystem evolving. So I support it on the grounds of children's public health. I support it on the grounds of we should be getting away from disposable anything, frankly, and we need to be moving in that direction. But I do think we need to protect vaping for those who are coming off the 40-a-day habit, as Claire has done.
Will it have a negative impact, Path, do you think, in the way that Claire has said? Can you protect the availability and accessibility of vaping for former smokers like Claire and still get rid of the disposable ones?
Yeah, I think you can. Look, I'm also a doctor, right? And I think vapes are absolutely critical to be available. They are probably one of the most effective smoking cessation techniques.
Are they?
They are
Yeah.
good, right? But there's a huge difference here between types of vapes, and there's a conversation worth having, because I think the problem I have with Claire's point of view is that she's asking us to believe in a world where we are all free to do exactly what we want, completely unaffected by our surroundings, simply by strength of will, right? And that's not true. And if you're a child and you're 14, 15, 16 or 17 and your friends are smoking a vape and it's easily available and it's cheap, you're going to start smoking them too. And that's a completely different problem to Claire, a former smoker who wants to reduce the number of cigarettes she's smoking, which is great.
Philosophically, we live in a society in which there are children and there are adults. And it's a free society. And everything that is available to adults is available to children. But what we do is we rightly make sure that children are not allowed to do what adults do.
But is it working?
What we don't do, or what I don't think we should do, is to infantilise the freedoms open to individual adults on the basis that we're constantly saying, yes, but what about the children? But it's interesting that this discussion has gone from public health, and I find it particularly galling. I'm a great admirer of Wes Streeting, but I find it really irritating so often with these health measures where they say, you must do this to save the NHS. That's been one of the arguments that used. And it feels more like not reforming the NHS, but reforming the public.
Yeah, that's the wrong reason.
But for me, just very quickly, the thing that's really important here is that this has moved now onto environmental. I'm accused of being selfish because I've got something that I throw away. Well, I mean, I know it's terrible to admit this on national television. I eat crisps. Right?
Do you?
There's crisp packets. I put them in the bin, right? I could. Every single thing
That
I
sounds
do
a bit
in
nanny
private,
state, Claire.
everything that I do as a private individual could have litter effects,
course,
right?
but
the
Claire-
idea that you're now going to have this complete clampdown on disposable vapes because you don't like the look of them or they seem to be littering. That's a litter problem. So is it a public health issue?
I think...
Or is it not?
It sounds like
And
it
by
could
the
be
way,
both. But can I just put this
recommended
stat...
to do disposable vapes by a number of doctors who said, try them all, and if they work for you, do not get obsessed with which one, see which works.
Can I
Disposable
come
fit.
back just
So
to one stat?
medical
When it comes to
advice,
children,
that's
of
mine.
course, we've always had children and we always have adults. But a recent survey from the Action on Smoking and Health, Claire, found that 53% of young people aged 11 to 17 in England report having begun vaping just to give it a try. Surely that in itself, because they would never have smoked, some of them.
No, listen, first of all, it's ASH, so that's a lobby group. Secondly, no, but I'm just pointing out.
Yeah.
Secondly, I'm not advocating that children vape. But I do think there's this danger. No, listen, I'm not advocating that
Then
children...
you are being the nanny state, aren't you?
No,
Surely
just
even your free will argument.
Well, not advocating
You're saying it should be
banning
their
it.
choice.
Not advocating.
How
Claire.
dare you imply that sticking up for adult freedoms means that you put at risk
I didn't.
children?
You just said.
No, children
I'm just
are in a
repeating back
different...
your own words,
yes,
Claire.
because children are in a different position.
Yeah.
There's lots of
All right.
things that I don't let children do, don't think children should do, but for free societies to treat adults as children in that way is the wrong...
George, should doctors be prescribing vaping for smokers?
In my instance, they informally did.
Yeah.
So therefore...
But this really, the argument seems to be here. No one's banning vaping. What
They
we're
are,
saying-
they are
No,
banning
no.
disposable vapes,
Yes.
which
All
right.
are not,
But
they're not banning
which are
vaping,
enjoyable
Claire.
for those of us
So
who use them.
it's coming down to whether or not you can learn to use a reusable vape, which I understand seems a
I know.
challenge, but
Seems
that
like
seems
a hard
bigger...
challenge. I know that you want to reshape my behaviour in a new way. All I'm saying is I've changed my behaviour once.
I want to save
on
you
the
money,
advice-
actually. I
on
want to
the
save you
advice of
money
the
more
public
than
health
help.
Let Path have fun. We'll move on to the next
Yeah.
thing.
It's great.
There's two types of freedoms here, and I think we're looking at them. This whole thing with one eye closed, right? We're talking about the freedom from interference, and I want that just as much as you do, right? I want to be able to have a fag if I want to have a fag, and I want people not to be able to tell me that. But I also want the freedom to shape my community. And when things are affecting things around me, I have a freedom and a right to be able to say something about that because I can see it's affecting people around me. Now, we need to think about both of those things at the same time.
Well, let me just look at this because you preempted it slightly, but you can talk about it now. The Times headline, tax junk food instead of using Ozempic to solve obesity, says Lords. Now, of course, we've had a discussion recently because the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, said, well, perhaps we should be looking at weight loss drugs to tackle the incidence of obesity. House of Lords report says something different. Where are you?
So I don't like the either-or framing of this headline, right? It's either tax junk food or it's to use this new, quite impressive drug, right? We need to do both of those things. Let's just remind ourselves of what we're talking about here, because this is often framed about the NHS, and you mentioned that, as Health Secretary mentioned this. This is about the NHS, sure, but it's about so much more than that, right? Like, I totally understand why a lawyer gets paid more than a warehouse worker, or why a member of Parliament gets paid more than their catering staff. What I don't understand is why they should get to live longer. And we have some of the widest disparities in the rich world on that account. And some of the most effective policies we have to address that is taxing unhealthy foods, taxing junk food. And that's why I think we need to take this much more seriously than we currently do.
George?
Yeah, I agree with what Darth said about the framing of it. But look, what's the problem here? The problem is we have a chronic public health crisis. And it's interesting that after years of investing more and more in public health, top-down messaging, it's been very unsuccessful. Why? Well, at the bottom end of our society, we have a lot of people, we have a lot of food poverty, we have a lot of people who are they're time poor as well as money poor, and they're living on garage sandwiches and junk food, and it's really bad for their health. At the other end, we have people with they're very time rich and money rich, and eating organic quinoa and enjoying very high lifestyles. As a public policy issue, we have got to help tackle this time bomb of obesity in our society. But you don't do it just by taxing junk food. My constituents are very hard pressed. They're in a rural area. Cost of energy's hit them hard. Disposable incomes are shriveled. Simply taxing the food they're relying on is not going to help. What you also have to do is get better food into schools. You have to start getting children eating healthier. We have to invest more in that. And we have to have a different conversation about the sort of role we want food to play in public health. One tax isn't going to solve it. I've also watched over the years when governments tax things, Treasury tend to become reliant on the tax revenues. So we do not want the Treasury saying, yeah, this is great, let's have lots of tax revenues from junk food. We need to get off junk food quite deeply in our society.
But you said two things there about education, and all the talk around these issues hasn't stopped the rise of obesity, although the last figures, a recent research by the Medical Research Council's epidemiology unit at the University of Cambridge, found that the sugar tax may have prevented more than 5,000 cases of obesity every year among girls in their final year of primary school since it was introduced in 2018. So do you think taxes might work?
Yes, I was an advocate of the sugar tax. So there are taxes that work, but my point is simply taxing the junk food on which many very low-income people rely will be also punishing them. I also, just having had a career in life sciences, I agree, these are very exciting drugs. When they come off patent, they'll become very, very cheap. I don't think simply giving people a drug to tackle obesity while they eat junk food is the solution to the NHS or public health. But these drugs, in partnership with a healthier eating culture, this country could get a lot fitter, a lot healthier, a lot more productive. If we don't, we're going to end up with more and more people trapped in the comorbidity of obesity, not working, and the government's attempt to get growth and productivity going will be held back. So this is really key for this country.
I think we have to be pragmatic about all of this. There is evidence that the sugar tax has reduced cavities in kids, and being admitted to hospital, one of the top reasons why kids are admitted to hospital is dental problems. So there is an issue here, not about the NHS, but just about their quality of life. And I think it's right that governments explore all the options to improve the quality of life. I am more in the camp of how do we make healthier food cheaper, because I see how much month people have at the end of their money in my local community, and how many parents don't need to be told about healthy eating. They know they want to do that. I agree with George, actually, time and money is a factor. There isn't any proposal at the moment about a tax on junk food. I know it's been discussed about, I know it makes for great headlines. I do think there is a question about what are we doing to reduce the cost of food in this country, because actually it has been spiralling, and it's been spiralling for a number of reasons about things that governments could do something about, like the taxes at the border that make food, fruit and vegetable coming into this country harder to bring in, healthier and cheaper. We could do much more in schools to support kids as well. I think it's that approach. I do think we need to recognise, though, where these policies have worked and they have helped parents help make it healthier choices, it is a good thing to do.
I think the Laws report is far-fetched. I mean, they're arguing for this tax on junk food. I don't think that is being taken seriously. It's not the main point. I actually, however, do worry about over-demonising the junk food and actually end up almost blaming the parents in the way that you described. I mean, I agree with you effectively on this one, because I think but I think it's important to say people want to feed their kids and their families as much as they can, and they haven't got enough money. I mean, one of the reasons why there's a disparity in health outcomes is because they're poor. And, we've got a situation now, dare I mention it, where some people who are older have got to choose between heating and eating in the, in the coming months. And I'm more worried about that than this kind of relentless, endless junk food thing. One of the things the government is saying is they're going to ban advertising totally, or that's a proposal. And actually the evidence on that is that it's had no impact. I mean, in fact, when TfL did it for, 2 years afterwards, obesity amongst young people went up.
All right. We're going to move on because otherwise we're going to lose the line to our next guest. So I'm just going to get you to look at this headline. BBC News, Commonwealth leaders to defy UK on slavery reparations. You saw in the headlines that Keir Starmer is in Samoa. It's at the Commonwealth leaders meeting there. And we've been told by our correspondent out there, James Landale, that they are set to defy the UK and agree plans to examine reparatory justice for the transatlantic slave trade. It's called CHOGM. Everyone is gathered there. It was about a 28-hour flight for the Prime Minister and the press lobby to join everyone here. Before we do speak to Bishop Rose Hudson-Wilkin, and I hope we will be able to, let's just open up the discussion here first of all. Stella, what have you made of Keir Starmer saying very definitely it will not be on the agenda, we're not going to discuss either an apology or reparatory justice, we want to look forward?
So actually I have sympathy with both sides of this conversation, because I think it is entirely proper for those communities that have been affected by slavery and the impact of slavery and abhorrent trade to be able to bring forward that concern. And that's what I think is happening. I know people are getting very excited about some kind of diplomatic crisis, but actually it is right for people to be able to express a view.
Right.
And I think
so
it is
right.
Why do you think
Downing Street has said
and
no?
I think it is right for Keir Starmer to say, look, we need to work out what we're going to do next. And there is a choice here about a conversation about slavery, or a conversation about, I mean, I want to talk about the fact that slavery still happens in our world. I want to talk about climate justice. I don't think these things are necessarily mutually exclusive, actually. I mean, I think there's some very serious conversations we could have about
but the direct question, sorry to interject, but the direct question is, should we pay reparations? That's what
no, that's not actually what,
leaders...
no, it's really important, because what they're saying is they want it in the conversation.
Yes, but a conversation that stems from first an apology that will then lead to the basis.
Sorry, I think it is really important to respect in this debate. What people are asking for is a conversation. There are a broad number of issues like artefacts, like apologies,
reparations.
and yes, like financial contributions. And the question is whether you spend time and effort on that. I think disrespecting that debate.
All right, George, you give it. Well, you give it.
Is the answer. And funny enough on this, I support Keir Starmer. 3 reasons. Firstly, it's a distraction from the very real challenges the Commonwealth face. Many of these island states and nations are really on the front line of climate change.
Yeah.
That's what we should be really focusing on. I think this is a distraction for them. Secondly, I think there's a real danger as we look back at history that we get carried away with this over-the-top obsession with apologising and paying reparations for everything. I think, on the example of slavery, yes, this country is stained by a lot of the profit and the money that's made. Apology for the history once, fine. But reparations to me should be paid. You can't go back through history. I mean, are we going to start paying?
Well, people have calculated. There are calculations. I mean, they're big.
Right,
something like 4 to 14 trillion.
It's complex. The east coast of Africa is littered with Arab slaving stations. The Arabs took a lot of Africans out of the east. Yeah. There were Barbary slavery in Cornwall. I mean, there's slavery all around the world. And I think with Stella, we should focus on reparations. I'd rather be giving reparations to the Windrush generation who was so badly let down when they came here. Reparations should be things we pay to people who are suffering today, really not history. Not history. And thirdly, I think today we've got a big problem of slavery. We should be focusing on that, human trafficking that's going on today. So I think it's a distraction. I think Keir Starmer's right to say so.
We're still trying to establish the line, partly because the Church of England said in 2023 it was deeply sorry for its involvement in the slave trade and committed £100 million of funding over the next 9 years, including a new impact assessment fund to invest in a better and fairer future. Do you think there is a case and the leaders at CHOGM, at the Commonwealth meeting, the Caribbean ones particularly, do want this to be the start of something that will lead to reparations?
Yeah, I do, and maybe as an offspring of the empire, I have a completely different view to George on this, which is the Prime Minister understands the concept of a bad inheritance better than most people, right? 14 years of Tory rule and we've inherited a country in bad condition. I'll tell you who's had a worse inheritance, the countries we used to colonise, right? And it's worth listening to them, I think, before we say, I'm going to give you this kind of reparation and not that kind of reparation, or I'm going to focus on this and not that. Because that's the dynamic of domination that these countries are complaining about. They want a different kind of approach to this. And if you listen to them, the word reparation is broad and susceptible to interpretation. The most common interpretation you will hear from the leaders at CHOGM is about climate financing, right? What does the Prime Minister want to go there to talk about? Climate financing.
Hence my point.
Well, you're talking about them.
That's not reparations for slavery.
It's not the point, because we're saying, OK, I want to focus on the future and not the past, but the best way to remedy the past is to shape the future together. And there is no route to net zero in this world without net zero in global south countries. That's the big question no one has any answers on. Britain can be like, you know what, we're going to help you find the answers.
Well, before I come to you, Claire, because I think we have got the line and I'm nervous about it. So let's see if we can talk to Bishop Rose Hudson-Wilkin. Welcome to you. You were involved in the work that was done by the Church of England. What do you understand reparations to mean?
I wasn't directly involved, but I am part of the Church of England. My understanding of reparations, I want to say at the outset that no one can ever compensate for the damage that was done when during that period of our history, of humanity's history. We can never repay. So my understanding of reparations, my understanding of what the Church of England is leading and doing and saying is, we did wrong to a whole people. And so what we want to do, as well as just simply, it's not enough simply for us to say we're sorry we got this wrong, is to actually, we're going to invest in your future. So it is not just picking up a bunch of money and handing it to individuals to say, you know, you were part of this, so here is some money. It is about investing in a nation, in nations. We in the West did wrong. We continue to do wrong in many ways.
Bishop Rose, on that, because you've said that you don't think it should be about giving a bunch of money to individuals, do you think it's up to a country then, or a government to do that? Or should it be institutions like the Church of England and perhaps individual families who had a more direct link to slavery to be the ones to invest in the future?
My dear sister, the government did not think twice to pay the slave owners. As a matter of fact, it was only, I believe, 2015 when we as a government stopped paying slave owners for having stopped the slave trade. Yes. So I do believe it cannot just be individuals or institutions. I think as a government, we need to own the fact that we benefited as a nation, as countries in the West, we benefited from chattel slavery in terms of the wealth that we accrued. And so it is important that we give back and that we listen to the people in the South as well.
Bishop Rose, we have guests here in the studio. Claire Fox, what do you say?
I think there's a real danger that many of the politicians around the Commonwealth are using the absolute barbarity of the period of slavery to give themselves a certain moral authority in the contemporary period and actually not be held to account for a range of things that they're not doing for the people that they are actually democratically accountable to. It's become very much of the moment to use the past and plunder the absolutely abhorrent things that happened in the past to try and raise oneself up in the present. I think that we do need, so I agree with Keir Starmer, the emphasis should be on the future, not on the past. And even the points that you made about, you know, as somebody who came from the empire and the whole point about decolonisation, I heard some students the other day saying, never mind the slavery thing, it's everybody, it should be a major decolonisation. And we know that this is a political movement now which basically tries to hold today's people accountable for the political periods that are long since past.
Right, well, let me put that to Rose.
And I would much rather that we did not plunder the suffering of those people in the past to make ourselves feel better today or to make ourselves victims today either.
Bishop Rose, do you want to respond?
Yes, you are so wrong, Claire. What happened in the past is still impacting today. Why do you think that people who look like me are still considered to be less than unless we are white? Why do you think we still have that history? It is because of the past. So unless we know and look at the past for what it was, we will not be able to address the impact of how it is affecting us today. And it is still affecting us. So it is not a, oh, people are just trying to make themselves feel better. Of course, governments in the Caribbean and in Africa need to be responsible in terms of how they use their resources. But actually, most of their natural resources were plundered by this country, by other countries in the West. If we want people to remain in the Caribbean, to remain in Africa, and stop migrating to this country here and other countries in the West, then we had better start investing in the Caribbean and in those places.
Claire?
The vast majority of people precisely do not look at somebody and see the colour of their skin and think of them in any way as inferior. There are racists about, don't get me wrong, but my goodness, that's the whole point, is in 2024 we face different problems and they're created by different reasons. And my concern is that we end up saying, like the Church of England at the moment are closing down churches. There's big crisis. You talk to any vicars, they'll say that churches are closing, there's not enough money. And I'm very concerned about both virtue signalling, actually the using of identity politics, contemporary identity politics, to play a game effectively. And I think that what doesn't help us understand periods in history is to try and judge them on the morality of today in quite that way.
Right, well, let Bishop Rose answer that point.
Churches are closing, not because of any virtue signalling. Churches are closing because those of us who profess faith, who say we're Church of England, are not worshipping and are not living out our faith. That's why our churches are closing. It's not because of people. It's not because of lack of money. It is a lack of faith and living out of faith. That's what it is.
Bishop Rose, we're going to bring the others in. Path.
Yeah, I guess just listening to that, it wasn't that long ago where people thought the British Empire was a good thing, right? It wasn't that long ago that people thought that, and basically no one believes that anymore. So that's a good thing. The fact that we can even have this debate on the BBC is a big deal, right? So I think that is a sign that we can start to do this. The world is changing, and all these countries that were once colonised are coming to terms with these new realities. We're going to get left behind if we don't come to terms with them too.
George?
Yeah, so I completely agree with Rose that the urgency of the Global South and the urgency of us investing in the sustainable development of Africa and the Caribbean and poor nations. But I don't think we should be making that case solely on the basis of our collective guilt for the actions of people hundreds of years ago. I think we should be making that case on the basis that it is in everyone's interest as global citizens to avoid a climate emergency and increase the standard of living of those people. I'd also just say, if the Church is going to talk about reparations, for me, it's a particular point of the Catholic Church, we should be paying some reparations to the children who've been abused in and through the Church. I'm not accusing this church of anything particularly. And thirdly, let me just finish because I listened to you. And thirdly, if we're going to talk about slavery, could we also make clear that it's not just about British colonial slavery. East Africa is littered with Arab slaving stations. China has done slavery all around the world. So I really fear if this is a sort of attack on our own history solely through that prism, and that Britain has somehow got to pay for the sins of the world, we will end up in a very daft place. We need to be supporting the Commonwealth and supporting the international development agenda, not least because of the climate emergency.
Stella?
I think, George, you exhibit why it is important that actually we do have a more mature, more open conversation about all of these issues, and we actually listen to the people raising them, not least because you also raised Windrush. Windrush and slavery are two very, very different issues. I speak as someone very involved in the campaign to get reparations for the Windrush. I've got Windrush casework, Claire, that's horrific. Can I? Yeah. No, actually what links them is what Rose said, is that actually we are dealing with people because of the colour of their skin who were dismissed and treated in a horrific way by the British state. But slavery in of its own right is an issue to talk about. Reparations is an issue to talk about. The conflation of them is frankly insulting because it lumps people in from very different parts of the world and very different points in history. It is a confident nation who can have the more mature conversation about the interactions, who can recognise the issues around climate change, around the artefacts. We have Ghanaian gold in the British Museum right now from slavery. That sparks a very interesting conversation about the consequences of our actions and what we need to learn now, because the risk is Windrush was only a decade ago. So we keep making those mistakes.
Let me go back to Bishop Rose for a final word. There are two things listening to the discussion. One is we started, Bishop Rose, with Keir Starmer's straightforward no to putting it on the agenda and no to an apology, because I presume it might pave the way to discussions about reparations. What would your advice be to the Prime Minister?
My advice to the Prime Minister would be to say that if we don't know where we're coming from, then we can't begin to make decisions about where we're going. And this is not about guilt. I don't want us to feel guilty, because guilt doesn't do anything. It just leaves us feeling a little bit uncomfortable. I don't want us to do that. What I want us to do is, as Stella says, to act in a mature, responsible way towards one another, to recognize the interdependence of humanity. And one of the big drivers in the West, and certainly here in this country, is about stopping people coming. We're not going to stop people coming if we don't address the issues that are facing them.
Bishop Rose Hudson-Wilkin, thank you very much for joining us, and I'm delighted we got the line established eventually. Just before we go, we'll have a quick whip round the panel on this issue. Financial Times, UK civil servants told to work 3 days a week in the office. Do you welcome that, George?
Yes, I do. I think there's a difference within the civil service. As a former minister, your interactions with the senior civil servants that you're working with is really important. And I found myself having meetings with civil servants who were working from home, babies in their laps on Zoom. Senior civil servants need to be around ministers. I think a lot of other civil servants don't have to be in London, and I think a lot of our public agencies, you can have people working from home, family-friendly hours. But the top of our senior service need to be close with.
What are you saying, George?
Well, can I just ask about you?
What I'm saying, Stella, I'll answer your question, is when you're dealing with a very important national issue with a senior civil servant, they should not be at home feeding 2 children while they're talking to
well then, George, you want to criticise me because during the pandemic,
not criticising you.
During the pandemic, I fed babies, I bathed them, I bathed them, I tabled amendments for legislation, and I voted on legislation at the same time, all from the same room. Are you saying I did that? I wasn't as
I'm not talking about the pandemic. I'm talking about post-pandemic. When you're just listen, Stella.
What is your problem with babies?
Hang on, Stella. Listen.
I have a problem with babies. I have a problem if you're dealing with a very senior civil servant who's earning 150 grand a year, and they're dealing on behalf of this country. They should be focused in the meeting during working hours on that issue. You can laugh all you want.
Yeah, because, George, you are actually making the argument for the nanny state because you're saying somebody else should take the...
Well, hang on, let me get a reaction. We've only got a minute. This headline, campaign grows for 4-day week as it's a win-win for staff and employers. Is it a win-win?
Some of the pilot studies show that it's potentially a win-win, yeah. But like both of these things we're talking about, this, I guess, the leading edge of the workers' right movement for working class people. For working class people, for white-collar people, right? We're talking not about money, we're talking about where you get to work, when you get to work. It's different, it's new. To be frank, no one really understands it, right? Working from home, is it good or bad for productivity? Is 4-day working week probably is good for productivity. We know even less about how it affects the home, right? So there's some things here we just don't understand. These are new realities. They will have a significant impact.
You've only got a few seconds.
I don't want lockdown reality to become the norm or to be sung as a virtue. And secondly, I think that public service, civil service and public service is very important that people are absolutely fully engaged in that. And for many young people, they might think that they're doing better at home and they say that they don't want to get the tube and it takes too long and it's commuting. Actually, they're losing out on not having the collective experience of working with their peers, of a teamwork and of building a real commitment.
Well, on that, I'm afraid we haven't got time, but, well, Stella, you can come on again. I'm very glad that everyone's here still discussing it beyond Thursday at 1 o'clock. Bye.